Good afternoon. Just gone 12 o'clock. I'm Alec Hogg, and with me today is our GM, Stuart Lohman, as always, who will be taking us through all the tech and making sure that we remain online all through the next 45 minutes or so as we discover the alternative, the Southern Hemisphere's island alternative to the Portuguese golden visa, or at least that's what I think it is. But Richard Haller is our special guest today. He's from our business partners at Sable. Richard, lovely to be with you. Nice to see that you've got a terrific background. You're going to be taking us through a little presentation in a moment. Before we go there, though, Stu, can you just help us through the tech and make sure that everything is working the way it should be?
Excellent. Thanks, Alec, and welcome, Richard. To those new to the webinar, on the control panel at the bottom of your screen, there's a little high five option. It's called Raise Hand. There we go. Got some residents. Alec, the high fives are coming through. If you can hear me clearly and see Alec, Richard, and myself on screen, there we go. Brilliant. There's also a Q&A option on that same control panel. If you put your questions in there, Alec will pass them on to Richard once he's finished with the presentation. But Alec, all good, the technical side.
Fabulous. Thank you, Stu. And it really is an interactive discussion. I can assure you that your anonymity will be retained, so you can get fairly personal with your questions, i.e. I've got $10 million sitting in the bank and I'd like to know if I can go and live in Mauritius and become a citizen there, etc., because we will only use your first name. So we never use both or the full name, and that makes it pretty difficult for anyone to who might have nefarious ideas to actually track you down. But Richard, before we get into the presentation, am I on the money there by saying that this is the Mauritian alternative to the Portuguese golden visa? I think Montenegro's got a golden visa as well. Well, certainly there are others in Europe, and of course there's the EB visas in the United States. Maybe just put it into global perspective for us.
Okay. Good afternoon, Alex. Alec, thank you. So I guess Mauritius is probably more comparable to Greece as a program. Essentially, it's a residency-by-investment program rather than a citizenship program. Portugal's been the mainstay of golden visa programs for many years, up until sort of October last year, where they changed the rules that you can't buy real estate to qualify at 250,000 euros anymore. So essentially, I guess the fallback position for Portugal, if you want access to the EU, is Greece, as that's a real estate investment at 250,000 euros, which qualifies for Greek residency. The Mauritius residency option is, I guess, a lot more holistic from a residency point of view, a real estate investment point of view, a wealth creation point of view, tax point of view, and sort of lifestyle close to South Africa. So it actually sort of ticks a number of boxes outside of the residency.
There are a lot of South Africans living in Mauritius. Did they go through this route?
So by and large, in the early days when the program launched in 2005, was the first project that qualified clients for residency. That was sort of the only avenue to live on the island up until about probably 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, they tried to introduce, and they have introduced certain other visas like a non-citizen retirement visa. So if you're over 55, you can go and live there if you bring in X amount of money every year. They've also done the premium visa, which is a 12-month visa to go and live and work in Mauritius, but you can't, it's working from abroad in a way. So there are other sort of visas you can get there, but the residency by investment program through real estate is the most stable one to be able to buy an investment and decide even in 5 years' time that you now want to go live in Mauritius. So it's very flexible.
My friend Magnus Haystack loves Mauritius. He spends a lot of time there. And I know this is not only because he's told me, but when I get hold of him for the occasional interview, it takes forever for his side of the interview to upload. And the reason for that, I think, is maybe he's living in an area where the connectivity is not great. But what's it like from that perspective? Because I'm sure a lot of people will be listening to this saying, hang on, I like South Africa. I'm hopeful that the government of national unity is going to succeed, that it is going to go into the future and that we do have a whole new dawn. But I'm not sure. And man, if I could live close by and in the sunshine, and as long as I could have connectivity, I could have my remote office over there and continue with my operations in South Africa. I just help us through that. And how open are they to that?
Very open. There's a big drive to encourage people to ultimately either live in Mauritius, do business in Mauritius, spend part of the year in Mauritius. You mentioned the connectivity, which is quite strange because it's actually meant to be faster than here in South Africa. And my experience from living there for many years is that the connectivity is pretty good, all in all. Every now and then the CCOM cable, I think, goes down, and there's a bit of trouble. But by and large, very, very good connectivity. I saw Magnus for a quick coffee on the West Coast. So he lives down on the West Coast, prefers that area. I'm more of a Grand Bay man up in the north. So it's a bit like whether you're a Cape Town person or a Joburg person. Sort of there's preferences between the two areas.
So is the West Coast a bit like the West Coast here in South Africa, where, well, it's a little bit behind the times, or is it more advanced there? I'm just thinking of his connectivity, and that's the practical part of all of this, yeah.
I would probably say, no, it's a few years behind Grand Bay up in the north. We're seeing a catch-up now, a lot of infrastructure development going on there. But by and large, it was always the more quiet side of the island. And the north was always considered to be more busy. But I think it's coming to a stage now where those two main areas, because of the influx of foreigners coming in, businesses coming in, they sort of, there's almost a level playing field now.
Richard, before we get to your presentation, I know people who live in Mauritius and they talk about cabin fever. It's a relatively small island. Is that a real thing?
It is. I think when you can do the combination of Mauritius and Cape Town or wherever you live, Europe, you've got kids in Australia, it's very good from a flight connectivity point of view. So your travel between Mauritius and the rest of the world is actually really good. So we normally see most of our clients have spent 6 months, 7 months of the year in Mauritius, and then they go and spend 3 or 4 months outside of Mauritius, and that's actually quite a nice combination.
Thank you. So it is a real thing. Okay, Richard, over to you. You've got a presentation that's going to take us on a whirlwind visit of the island, as in addition to actually unpacking how Mauritius's investment visas compare with those elsewhere.
Perfect. So I thought it was just good to go into the program itself in a little bit of detail, just to make sure that I think the fundamentals of the program come through correctly. We often meet with clients and they come with information that's not correct. So, in order to make a decision whether somebody wants to invest in Mauritius or go to Greece or maybe do Portugal, it's quite nice just to delve into some of the fundamentals. And then we will look at some of the real estate that qualifies for residency. Okay. And you can see my screen. Got it? Perfect. All right. Okay, so not to spend too much time on this, but this is ultimately the island of Mauritius. We spoke now, Alec, about the two areas. So Grand Bay up in the north here, as one of the main expat areas. That's where all the developments initially started, close to 20 years ago. And then Black River, Tamarin region, which is the other popular area, which is now playing catch up to the north. But ultimately, those are the two areas.
With Port Louis in between, and presumably that's the biggest town.
With Port Louis in between, which is the capital, it's not really a place you're going to go and live. It's more of a administrative capital where the government buildings are, and there's a little waterfront there. But most of businesses moved out to the Ben Cyber City region. And then we're seeing decentralization of businesses through the smart city planning. So you're seeing the smart cities up in Grand Bay, and you're seeing them on the West Coast. And within those smart cities, you've now got the commercial spaces. So that's working quite well from a sort of decentralization point of view.
How far is it from Grand Bay to Port Louis? In other words, if you were to be living where you're living and you need to go into the capital city, or is it a city?
It could be considered a city, yes. It is about 25 minutes plus minus. If you're going in the morning, sort of peak traffic, you're probably providing for about 45 minutes or so.
And the airport?
Airport, an hour and 7 minutes to be exact, for my many trips from there. Generally, not too much traffic with the new sort of infrastructure and bypass they've done.
Fabulous, thank you.
All right, and just stop me if you have any questions along the way. So it's been running, as I mentioned, for about 20 years now. It's been a very successful program for South Africans over the years. Quite a simple program in that it's a $375,000 property purchase within an approved development. So those are generally called, now smart cities, but you've got different ones: IRS, RES, PDS. The actual terminology is not too important, but it's a development zone for foreigners. The purchaser with the spouse and children under the age of 24 qualify for the permanent residency status. And then about 2 years ago, just post-COVID, they improved the program with a number of changes. Two of them being you can bring your parents with you. So if I've purchased, I can bring my parents and my kids. So it covers 3 generations. And we're seeing that being quite a popular change within the program. Nice to know that if you've got elderly parents, you can bring them with, even if it's for part of the year. And then the other one is every $375,000 increment within a property purchase qualifies for 1 residency. And so you can now buy as 2 families 1 property at $750,000, or 3 families and 3 friends or siblings at $1.12 million. So that's quite an interesting avenue. Then important and incomparable to, I guess, if you look at the Portugal Golden Visa, there are requirements around visitations, language tests, but you are ultimately getting to a passport through that program. Mauritius, pretty simple. You buy the property, we apply for the residency for you. There's no visitation, there's no language tests. As long as you own the property, you've got access to Mauritius. You can also go and work there now. That was one of the other changes they made. So if you have permanent residency through property, you can also go and work within the local employment market and go and settle there.
And the language, is English well spoken there?
Very much so. So the main business language is English. I've been operating there for over 10 years now, and my French is very limited, but it's French, and then it's the local Creole language, which is a dialect of French. Then just looking at sort of the main reasons why clients have bought over the many years. So obviously one of the important avenues is it's a hard currency property market. So you're hedging your rand. So nice as part of your portfolio if you sort of overweighted in South Africa. It's in US dollars, but it's still close to home. The estate planning aspect and leaving a legacy down the line for your kids can be planned quite well through the structuring of trusts and companies in Mauritius. So that's important for a number of clients, and particularly when they're building up a portfolio of properties, then those structures become quite valuable. As a plan B cover, nice to know you've got something to go and spend some time during the year, or go and move for a couple of years. A number of our clients have moved to Mauritius, spent 10 years there, then decided, okay, I'm going to move back to Cape Town and spend the last few years with my grandkids. So we see a bit of that happening. And then just general lifestyle, lots of sun, lots of beach, lots of water sports. So by and large, a very outdoor lifestyle. And Mauritius is well geared for that. And as an island, generally very safe and secure, and not too much happens from that perspective. A bit of petty theft, but by and large, all good. The driving is a bit suspect sometimes, but other than that, it's pretty harmless. So looking at the real estate market there, like all markets, wherever you're buying, the fundamentals apply. So ensure strong location. So very much sticking to the prime areas of Grand Bay, stick to the prime areas of Tamarin, Black River. There are a number of schemes sort of outside of those areas, but by and large, expat family coming in to rent a property or be on a holiday. They want to be close to infrastructure, close to the schools, and we see those being a better sort of long-term investment and rentability throughout the ownership. Then, make sure that if you're buying off plan, developers have been, we obviously, that's part of our job, due diligence on the developers, make sure that they've got a good track record and all of that the building company is sound. There's a lot of sort of check boxes that we need to go through to make sure we're happy. And then, the duration of ownership, the entry and exit costs for a property purchase in Mauritius are about 13% in total. So you're in for 5% transfer fee, 1% notary fee. If you're buying a completed unit, you're paying commission as a buyer, which works differently than South Africa. And then you pay a 5% exit tax, which many people don't mention along the way. So you're in for 13%, which is not terrible. It's probably not dissimilar, I guess, to South Africa by the time you're in and out. But good to know that that's sort of your cost, and therefore keeping it for that longer duration, like 6-7 year period is advisable.
Richard, I've got a couple of questions, and there are a few that are coming through. The first one is really from my side. You mentioned rentability, so it appears quite obvious if you're using the word that you're going to generate income off that property. And how does that work? Are there would you use a local management agent, for instance?
Absolutely. So the market has evolved quite well over the last sort of 5-6 years, where you've got a number of management companies. Even some of the developers have in-house management companies that run the rental management program within the development. So that's sort of the go-to option if you're an investor and you're looking to garner a return out of it. Then we would guide you more to a product that is potentially an hotel product that is looked after by the hotel, and occupancies are good in Mauritius, so the yields can be reasonable and obviously can do well if occupancies are high. And then you also get your standalone normal apartments style development with lots of facilities, paddle courts, swimming court, restaurant on site, and that is then managed potentially by one independent operator within the entire development. So you don't have 10 or 20 different people renting properties. So it's quite controlled from a tourism perspective in Mauritius. You have to have the license to rent out your property on a short-term basis. You need to have fire hydrants. So it's sort of a lot of checks and balances that the government has put in place to protect the tourism industry. So important to know about that.
And Derek wants to know, what type of property does that $375,000 buy? Approximately, he says.
Perfect. We're just going to touch on that on the next slide. So perfect question. So when you look at pricing, the $375,000 at this point in time gets you a 2-bedroom, 100-odd square meters, plus minus. That's sort of the average property. If you're going to sacrifice location, you can sort of go less per square meter. But if you compare it to Cape Town, CBD, Atlantic Seaboard, we're at anywhere between $4,000 and $6,000 a square. So you're seeing developments coming out at very quickly at the 90,000 to 100,000 Rand per square meter range. The Mauritius is not too different to that. You range between plus minus $3,800 going up to sort of $5,500. Also comparable to Manchester. I was in Manchester last week looking at some UK property options, which also between sort of £4,000 and £6,000 a square meter. For me, the difference is that Mauritius offers you a few things more than just the investment. So one of them is you're obviously going into hard currency, so that's sort of tick that box. You can mortgage up to 70% of the property at relatively low interest rates. So this is very different to any of the other programs. So if you're looking at Greece as an example, you have to provide the 250,000 euros in cash. Mauritius, you can mortgage. So you can put down your, $150,000, and you can gear the rest. You can also live there and work there. So that sort of covers you if you ever want to go and move and do something else. And then importantly is the tax element of it. Now, the tax, the country is considered a low tax jurisdiction. So 15% for individuals, 15% for companies, unless it's a special GBC company, can be lower than the 15%. No inheritance tax, no capital gains tax. But important to note that that's if you are tax resident there. Obviously, if you're tax resident in South Africa, it's a different story. You need to abide by the tax laws here.
Just explain that, GBC?
A global business company. So that's a type of company that you can set up if you trade in a particular type of industry. So it normally relates to exports or exports of services. And if I think it's more than 50% of the revenue is coming from outside of Mauritius, you then have a special dispensation around some of the tax rates that apply to that company. So we see quite a bit of that.
How easy is it to actually get a bond, that 70% bond?
Very similar to South Africa. So you go through your sort of income statement and balance sheet, provide that to the banks. They look at the property purchased, and by and large, the properties we look at are in prime areas, are supported by infrastructure, facilities. The ability to rent it out is really good rental market in Mauritius. So it might take probably a 3-month process to go through, but a number of our clients have gone through that process, and it's very much like South Africa.
An anonymous attendee wants to know, what are the SARS issues when taking up residency in Mauritius? You mentioned that if you want to get the 15% tax rate, you've got to be tax resident in Mauritius. But what about the South African perspective?
So important to distinguish between the residency component, which is your permanent residency status linked to the property. So that gives you the right to go and live there, fly in and out sort of as you please. You stand in the special residence queue, you don't stand in the tourist queue, and you go through airports a lot quicker. The tax residency is a completely different discussion. That's based on ultimately where you are considered to be physically present, where you're ultimately residing. Yeah, if you look at South Africa, it's normally more than 6 months in South Africa, plus a few other items, and you're still deemed to be tax resident here in South Africa. So that's sort of one issue. The residency and permanent residency is a completely other issue, and has sort of nothing to do with SARS.
Her other question is, what are the issues related to dying in Mauritius with no relatives back home?
Never had that question before. Not sure. I would have to check on that one.
Okay. All right. Thomas's question was, can you finance these properties? You have answered that one already. Another one is, another anonymous attendee, I'm dependent on my living annuity. Please elaborate on how to manage this, especially with respect to SARS.
That's not really my field, I guess. That would have to go through the retirement law in South Africa and how that applies. We do at Sable have, our South African tax specialist desk here. So, for me, one of the great things about sort of Sable International as a group is that we can take the client from the start of the journey in terms of, if they're moving, what is their tax implications? What is their exit tax if they're going to move permanently? What kind of property do they need to buy? How do they grow their wealth through a structure? So that, going back to that question, as Sable, as a group, we would take that client and look at the whole process and then guide them over that journey.
Okay. Ron wants to know extent of South African diplomatic missions, passport applications, etc.
So the ability to get a citizenship or a passport in Mauritius is very, very difficult. I mean, basically, it's a no. Even if you have resided in Mauritius for 20 years or 30 years, the law states that after 5 years, I think, of never leaving the island, you can apply for a passport, but that is at the discretion of the Prime Minister's office. The complexity comes in that the island's always been very protective of their beachfront land, and rightly so. They're trying to protect that to still give the general population access to the beaches and all of that. But as soon as you get a passport, you can then buy beachfront land. So they've been very tight in terms of how they give those passports out.
Okay. But if you were resident in Mauritius, presumably as a South African passport, you would have to go through all the hoops to get visas to go to Schengen countries or United States, etc.
Correct. You still have to apply at the South African embassy in Mauritius. The process, from what I've heard from a number of people, it's easier from a timing point of view, and in terms of getting a Schengen visa for Europe is apparently easier. And I've heard this from at least sort of 6 or 7 people over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. But yeah, by and large, you're not getting any benefits to access the rest of the world. So when you compare this program and the benefits of it, if you're looking for global mobility or access to the EU as an example, then we would guide that client to look at Grenada as an example, which is a great way to get a passport to travel to the UK for 6 months consecutively, travel 3 months in Europe. So that's sort of a different type of mechanism to get global mobility, or go to Greece and get residency. You can travel around the Schengen with that residency. So it all depends on what the requirements are from the client.
So the idea here is, if you've been to Mauritius and you love it and you love the lifestyle and you like the outdoor and the water sports, you want to be close to home, this is something that would appeal to you. And I was just wondering about some parts of South Africa have got pretty bitter winters, not KZN, of course, or not the coast of KZN, but elsewhere. Are you finding some of your clients doing that they're becoming, you wouldn't call them swallows, because swallows don't go from South Africa to Mauritius. I don't know if they're seabirds who do that, but is it more pleasant there? Do people go there in winter?
Very much so. So the winter period essentially starts from, let's say, April through to September, probably end of August. It can be a little bit windy and a bit of rainy, but by and large, you're sitting at 22, 23 degrees. You can still swim. So it's actually, I actually prefer that time. So April through to September. October is beautiful. November heats up, sort of November to February, March even. It's sometimes, if you don't like the heat, come back to South Africa and spend great summers here, and then go to Mauritius for 7 months of the year during winter.
Jenny wants to know, that 5% exit tax, does it only apply when you sell the property?
Correct. Only applies when you exit. There's that 5% registration fee, or transfer fee as they call it there, when you buy the property. That's like our transfer fees in South Africa. But that 5% is the exit fee on the selling price when you sell.
Anonymous attendee, again, seems like a few people don't believe me when I say we're going to keep their names anonymous. Wants to know, what is the standard and costs of medical services in Mauritius? And, let's start with that one. There is a second question.
And an important question, because, it's probably a question we get asked almost at every meeting we have with the client. What about medical? So we've seen a massive ramp up of medical services in Mauritius over the last 5 years. So if you drive around, you'll see the new clinics, CK Clinic, as an example, in Grand Bay. There's another one in Forbach, which is about 5 minutes down the road. There's a new cancer hospital that's been built and it's just been completed. And you're seeing a few of these, a new hospital coming on the West Coast in Black River, Tamarin. So they've geared up very much for the medical side. From a medical aid perspective, there's 2 options that I know of. So one is you can keep your medical aid in South Africa with certain schemes, and notify them that you're in Mauritius, and because it's part of the SADC region, you are covered in a different way that you may be if you're outside, in Europe, as an example. So you've got an extended cover, or you can claim essentially what it would cost in South Africa to have that procedure. So there's sort of some coverage out of your normal medical aid. The other option is to go for a international cover, which can be quite expensive, and sometimes a little bit more expensive than our South African sort of options of medical aids. But we do see quite a few of our clients keeping their existing medical aid. to have coverage in South Africa. And, the specialists are still good here.
And the second question from this attendee is, are there retirement resorts like, say, the Amber Valley in Howick, in that area, as they call it, God's waiting room? Do you have something similar?
Not really. It's been tested, but we found that when people are moving countries, they don't really want to be living in a retirement village. They want to go and, live in a complex like everybody else and, enjoy themselves. And I think it's a bit of a different mindset. But the principle of buying a property in Mauritius as a foreigner is that you are generally buying within a complex or an estate that offers all those types of services. So you've got your restaurant on site, you've got your clubhouse, you might be on a golf course, you've got your tennis court or paddle courts. We're seeing paddle courts as a big thing in Mauritius. And that's by and large, keeps everybody happy from a facilities point of view. But the sort of full retirement village concept that we have in South Africa, no.
Richard, I think we need to get into your presentation again. We'll pick up on the questions in a little while, but I'd hate for us to get to the end of our time and then we haven't covered all the areas that we need to.
Perfect. We touched on the financing, so up to 70%, up to the 65 years of age. And then we spoke about the structures in terms of how you can hold the property. And that's very much a bespoke, discussion with the individual to see what they're trying to achieve out of this. So I mentioned we're just going to touch very briefly on the property options. If we spoke about the facilities, one of the big estates or bigger estates in the north in Grand Bay is Montjouzy Golf and Beach Estate. Now well established, probably completed about 5 years ago in terms of the golf course, but we're seeing a number of phases roll out in the estate, and then just outside of the estate, they've built a new boulevard that runs down almost at the right-hand side of this picture. And that will then house some residential, some commercial offices, restaurants, and retail. So this is quite a sort of big smart city plan that wraps around this Montjouzy, but a really nice option. As South Africans, we sort of love the estate vibe and the facilities and all of that. So this has appealed very much to that market. And if you look at pricing, $550,000 buys you a 130 square meter, very well-spec'd apartment. So more top-end luxury with lots of facilities around it. So you're sort of paying a bit of a premium for that. But entry level, about $550,000 for a two-bed apartment. And then villas going up to starting at about $1.4 million, going up to $5 million in total. So nice option. There's a management program around this rental management program. So you can use it for a couple of months of the year, but then get the company to air it for you, open it up, make sure it doesn't go moldy. And that's an important part of owning a property, is making sure it's aired well. So we like that option. Looking more at sort of the mid-level La Pointe apartments. Some of our viewers might know the Club Med and the Pointe Cania hotels, two hotels over here. This is situated literally just behind that. So really prime location. It's got 2 paddle courts, a restaurant on site, a 350 square meter gym. It's got 3 pools, so 1 pool in each phase. And this is sort of more of an entry level, $425,000, which gives you a 130 square meter apartment. So comparing that to the previous one, Montjouzy, we had about a 25-30% premium for a sort of similar type of product. So those are sort of nice options. And then just touching on the West Coast, we've got something called Sunset Cove, which entry level is $325,000. But once you can add a furniture pack to that, you'll get up to the $375,000 if you want for residency. That is in the heart of Tamarin, so you're just off the coastal road or the main road. And I think from a general rental perspective, a mid-term rental for business and people coming to consult on the island, that'll be quite a nice product to be able to rent out for that and get a decent yield. When we look at yields in Mauritius, we're anywhere from 4% up to 6.5%. per annum, and with a 6% capital growth per year, you're looking at sort of close to 10% in hard currency, which is pretty decent.
So if I understand correctly, Sunset Cove is where it's kind of for starters $325,000, but you can go into, depending on how deep your pockets are, you can actually go quite a bit further up the scale. You said up to $5 million for some of those villas. What's the exchange control aspect of that?
So no exchange control in Mauritius. You can send money freely in and out. Obviously, from South Africa. Yeah. So, you've got your $1 million discretionary allowance each. Then you've got your another 4 million. So if you're a couple, you can bring out 10 million rand per annum. So that's not a bad start. And also, if you buy off plan, you've normally got about 2.5, even 3 tax years to bring out your money. So the construction period is sort of 24 months, let's say. If it launches, it's a brand new launch, you can buy, on the launch, and that'll take about 8-10 months. So you can stretch it over 36 months, which means you've got enough time to sort of manage that process.
But what if you are looking at this, you're terribly excited about it, you would like to go and live in Mauritius and take advantage of the residency, you've got enough, you've got 7 or 8 million rand, which will at least open the door without a mortgage bond, which would clearly reduce that cost quite significantly. Are there properties available to buy at that level?
Absolutely. The mid-market, you're sort of sitting at about, I'd say, between 7 and 10 million rand. So what is that about? Let's say, 450 to $650,000. And there's actually quite a nice spread of property across that price point. So whether that's a new development, which suits a lot of people because of the time factor of getting money out, or they're liquidating some assets and they need time for that, or we can find a completed unit that is ready. It's sold with the furniture in Mauritius. Generally, these properties all come with a furniture pack, and so it gets sold with it. So you can get something quite nice, sort of under the 10 mark.
All right, but it doesn't. In other words, I think what I was trying to understand, it doesn't have to be a brand new project. It can be an existing one.
Absolutely, it can be an existing one. And as part of the our Sable team on the ground, our job is to obviously look at all of those factors, and then take our clients around and show them the best options, whether that's off plan, or completed units. Sometimes the client might come in with one avenue and they'll end up realizing, okay, it's actually better the off plan option for now because I need the time. So we'll go through that process with the client.
Just to remind you that we're coming to the end of our conversation today, but if you'd like to post a question, go to the Q&A box, click on it and type your question in. We have one here from another anonymous attendee who says, if I'm still working and earning an income in South Africa, therefore paying taxes to SARS, what would the benefit be to buy property in Mauritius besides the offshore US dollar investment? But what can I do via an offshore investment portfolio?
So part of the sort of type of ownership that you can use to own a property, we touched on very briefly, is the trust structure. So if you want to build up a portfolio of property in Mauritius, the trust structure, helps from a tax perspective, all above board, that you can build a portfolio that is, taxed in an efficient way.
Jenny's got a tricky one for you. She says, I bought already and have my residency. I would have liked to have been warned in advance about Mauritius's forced heirship laws, i.e. the property must be left to the children, not to your spouse only, or to your estate. Are there ways to get around this, e.g. buy as a trust, which is kind of what you've said now?
Absolutely. So, that's a critical point. The forced heirship rules applies when you are resident in Mauritius. So if you consider, resident, you're living there and you die there, and and they don't know you've got another will, as an example, that applies. If you own a property in Mauritius and you are resident in South Africa, your will can apply. So there's sort of distinctions, and I think everything is looked at as on an individual case. But exactly what you said now, Alec, the trust structures and the companies where you can transfer shareholding rather than properties is an important mechanism to manage those things.
So if you're already in it, as she is, and she's already got the property, do you have to then pay additional taxes if you're going to transfer it into a trust?
There is actually a question I asked a couple of months ago. There is the ability to transfer from an individual to a company or a trust, provided that the company is 100% owned by the individual that owns the property currently, and then I think it's the settler of the trust. So there are ways to do it. There will be some admin fees along the way, but so Jenny is welcome to drop a note through you, and we can look at her situation.
Brenda's question is indication of monthly holding costs, levies, rates, etc.
Okay, so monthly holding costs from a levy perspective are very similar actually to South Africa. So you look at a 3-bedroom apartment maybe in Cape Town, you're looking at about, probably let's say 4,500 Rand levies. In Mauritius, you're on about 12,000 rupees, maybe 14,000 if there's lots of facilities, but there's no rates and taxes to the government. So that's quite a big saving. So it's really only the levy cost, the holding statement, and then probably 1,000 Rand a month from an airing perspective to make sure that they open up the apartment, air it, if you're not renting it out.
Ron's question, I see the interest seems to be on the tax residency and how to mitigate the effects of a South African predatory state. Perhaps another webinar can be considered to deal with this aspect. Interesting, but yeah, it just maybe in a nutshell, is he accurate on that? Because you started off by talking about 15%. So let's just use the hypothetical example. Someone in the top tax bracket paying 45% marginal income tax in South Africa would find it rather appealing, no doubt, to be resident in Mauritius at 15%, but they would have to invest first to be able to benefit from it. So it'd be interesting to see net how many years it's going to take you to be able to offset that.
Yeah, I think the tax discussion is always an interesting one, and there are benefits there, provided you're willing to go and live there and spend some time there and properly settle for a good couple of months of the year. Then there are the benefits of that, and we've actually done an exercise where we looked at almost the wealth creation if someone had left 7 years ago and sort of sold their house in Cape Town, moved to Mauritius, earned a similar amount. And what the wealth difference was after 7 years. And it was funny where we came up with a similar, when I was having coffee with Magnus, we came to a point of about 70 to 80%. And we both came to a very similar numbers. So, there are benefits over the long term, but there's obviously a short-term cost of moving, of resettling, a family, and things like that. So, and also the line of business you're in, how remote you are, can you manage from a distance? All of those things have a cost implication along the way. So it's important to look at all of that.
MJ's question, and I think we close off the webinar with this one. Can one register and own a Mauritian company and have that company owned by a South African trust?
I do not think so, no. So we've got a wealth division here in Cape Town that specializes in the structuring side of things. But my understanding is that there's no benefit of having the South African trust own the Mauritian company. If you're going to do a trust structure and company, you want to look at an offshore structure outside of South Africa that makes sense depending on what your objectives are.
Well, thank you, Richard. You've shone a very bright light on this opportunity, which, as we've seen from the questions and certainly from the attendees here, and I'm sure many more are going to be watching the recording, there's a lot of interest in this from a South African perspective. Things are going well at the moment here at home, but that doesn't mean that you aren't mindful that we do live in a developing country, and there's always going to be bumps along the road, and risks are always higher in a developing country than they might be elsewhere. And certainly Mauritius does offer a good option for those who can work remotely and indeed don't want to go too far away from the sunshine. Before we leave, any final words, and then we'll just ask Stu to update us on how the recording of this discussion will be available.
Yeah, I mean, I think the principle that it's so important not just to look at the real estate as an example, but to look at the entire implication of what you're thinking about doing offshore. And that's where the sort of Sable, the various different divisions come into play, and create quite a powerful ecosystem to make sure that you don't move countries and get double taxed, as an example, or you don't, I look after the real estate and investment migration business, and that is going into foreign jurisdictions, and you've got to have the right partners on the ground there to go and make sure you don't make mistakes. So very important to consider the whole pipeline of the decision and not just one element of it.
And I think that is so well pointed out. So many people that I know have made those mistakes by trying to save a few bucks here and there. I'll read on the internet, or it isn't like that. And having lived in a foreign country for 3 years, it's a very, very different place. And just get a friend. And I guess from what you're saying is that Sable's done it for many years, for decades in the UK, and clearly now also in Mauritius and in other parts of Europe. I'm not going to go through your whole client list, but certainly you do have that reputation with Reg Bamford and what he's built there over the decades. Richard, had a lovely talking with you. Stu, before we close off, would you like to just take us through where the recording of the webinar is going to be available?
Thank you, Alec, and thank you, Richard. I believe the most recent Cape Town winter might be the biggest marketing push, Richard, into Mauritius.
Even the Hermanus winter, I'll have you know. Even people in Hermanus, oh boy, we thought this was paradise, but stormy weather. You're right, Rich. Stu.
Thanks, Dad. The team will reconsider the webinar, and then we'll publish it on the BizNews TV channel on YouTube, Alec, and as well as all the attendees and those who didn't make today, the link will be sent out in an email to them post publication on YouTube. So yeah, all good.
Stuart Lohman, Richard Haller is with Sable. I'm Alec Hogg. Until the next time, cheerio.